Welcome to this explainer. Have you ever wondered why your own brain sometimes feels like a total mystery? Well, today, we're going to unpack the hidden psychological forces that dictate exactly how we connect, how we sleep, and how we change. We are basically going to make the invisible visible. You know the feeling, right? Have you ever found yourself trapped in one of these incredibly frustrating, universally human scenarios? You walk into a room and you just can't seem to make a friend. Or you wake up in the dead of night, utterly terrified and completely unable to move a single muscle. Or maybe you set this massive, life-altering goal for yourself, only to fall back into your exact same habits like 3 days later. Look, these aren't personal failures. They are deeply ingrained psychological patterns. So, here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll start with our waking connections in the social mind, travel down into our sleeping brain to explore the unconscious mind, and finally, we'll rise to conscious self-growth with the evolving mind. Let's dive right into part 1, the social mind and the psychology of making friends. Making friends isn't just about looks or having endless confidence. It really comes down to 5 subtle psychological barriers that feed into a pretty vicious, socially anxious cycle. First, you avoid vulnerability. You keep your thoughts and feelings totally guarded, which, of course, keeps your conversations strictly surface level. And because you aren't really opening up, you go home and start overanalyzing the interaction. Did I say something weird? Are they judging me? This overthinking creates immense anxiety. Because of that anxiety, you slip into passive social behavior, basically just waiting for the other person to reach out. Why do you wait? Because you are terrified of rejection. And finally, all of this mental gymnastics leaves your social energy completely drained, so you just limit future interactions entirely. Now, waiting for the other person to make the first move is a huge passive trap. Think about it. If both people are just sitting around waiting for the other to initiate a conversation or make a plan, absolutely nothing happens. Real, lasting connections require equal mutual effort to actually survive. If you just sit back and wait, the connection is going to fade before it even really begins. And this brings us to a really tragic irony. Psychology shows us that by playing it safe, by not reaching out, not expressing interest, keeping your guard up, you are indeed protecting yourself from the pain of rejection. But in doing so, you are actively blocking the very connection you're craving. You essentially guarantee the exact isolation you are so afraid of. Speaking of things we're afraid of, let's move to part 2, the unconscious mind and the science of sleep paralysis. Let's normalize this right off the bat because waking up completely paralyzed feels like a horror movie, but it's incredibly common. The first root cause is basically a biological brain-body desync called remitonia. See, during deep sleep, your brain temporarily disables your muscle movement so you don't physically act out your dreams and hurt yourself. Sleep paralysis is simply what happens when your consciousness returns before that natural biological paralysis fully wears off. Your mind wakes up, but your body is literally still asleep. But beyond just natural biology, there are external triggers that force this misfire. We've got stress and emotional pressure, which actively disrupt your normal sleep cycles. Then there's an irregular sleep schedule. Staying up way too late or sleeping at totally random times literally confuses your brain's delicate transition between sleeping and waking. And furthermore, some people just possess a natural hyper-awareness. They remain mentally vigilant to sounds or emotions even while they're resting, which drastically increases the chance of their consciousness suddenly activating right in the middle of REM sleep. And then there's the 5th cause, which is the really terrifying part: hallucinations. Why do people feel like they're being watched, or hear footsteps, or see dark figures standing right by their bed? It's because that barrier between sleep and waking dissolves, and your active dreaming system quite literally spills out into the reality of your bedroom. I really want you to take comfort in this, though. While the shadows, the whispers, and that heavy feeling of being trapped are intensely terrifying, they're just neurological overlaps. Your brain is processing the dream data as waking reality, which absolutely triggers a genuine physical fear response. But there is no actual physical threat in the room. Once you understand the mechanics of it, the whole experience starts making a lot more sense. Finally, let's step into part 3, the evolving mind and the rules of self-transformation. Have you ever wondered why some people permanently change their lives while others stay stuck in the exact same patterns for years? Well, real transformation doesn't actually start with action. It starts with identity. If you see yourself as a procrastinator, your brain will dutifully repeat procrastinating behaviors to match that label. But when your identity shifts to, hey, I'm someone who takes action, your behavior begins to align naturally. We always act in ways that match who we fundamentally believe we are. This brings us to making small changes, because big transformations never happen overnight. They are the result of biological rewiring. Every single time you repeat a small behavior, you strengthen a pathway in your brain through a process called neuroplasticity. Over time, those tiny repeated actions turn a task that once felt incredibly difficult into a completely automatic habit. That is exactly how real change becomes permanent. Now, here's a trap we absolutely all fall into, relying on motivation to fuel our change. Listen, motivation is temporary. It fades so quickly. Psychology shows us that optimizing your environment influences your behavior far more than willpower ever could. If your surroundings naturally support your goals, change feels easy. If they don't, even the strongest, most intense motivation will eventually burn out. So these concepts build into a really cohesive roadmap for personal growth based on 5 core psychological principles. You start by shifting your identity. Then you make incredibly small, manageable changes. Next, you optimize your environment so you don't have to rely on that fleeting motivation. As you do this, you inevitably face discomfort, which you just have to embrace. And wrapping all of this together is the constant cultivation of self-awareness. When you hit that discomfort at step 4, remember something absolutely crucial. Transformation always involves resistance. Your brain is literally hardwired to keep you in familiar patterns simply because familiar feels safe to it. So when you try to change, psychological resistance appears. This doesn't mean you're failing. It just means your brain is doing its job, adjusting to something totally new. Which brings us right to the overarching through line of this entire explainer: understanding your patterns. Whether it's realizing you push friends away because you secretly fear rejection, or recognizing that your sleep paralysis is triggered by irregular sleep and stress, or just noticing the environmental triggers of your bad habits, that awareness is the mandatory first step to taking back control. It's like the quote says, you can't change what you don't notice. Self-awareness is the key to the whole shebang. When you start actually observing your habits, your social triggers, and your knee-jerk reactions, you finally gain leverage over them. Simply observing your automatic behaviors is the secret to stepping off of autopilot and turning them into intentional, powerful actions. So we have explored the social barriers keeping you isolated, the unconscious glitches haunting your sleep, and the neurological rules for completely rewiring your identity. You now possess the actual tools to understand how your mind really works. So the only question left to ask is, what are you going to do with this awareness? What will you change today?